Hello everyone. Today we're going to discuss the story Indigo, which is written by Satyajit Ray. What makes the story interesting is that until the first half of the story, it is a very normal narrative, but all of a sudden, there is a suspenseful plot, and he uses horror and paranormal activity to capture the attention of the readers right till the end of the story. There are various themes in the story, everything will be discussed. So make sure you watch this video until the end. So let's begin. My name is Aniruddha Bose. I'm 29 years old and a bachelor. For the last 8 years, I've been working in an advertising agency in Calcutta. So, this is where he worked. With the salary I get, I live in reasonable comfort in a flat in Sardar Shankar Road. The flat has two south facing rooms and is on the ground floor. 2 years ago, I bought an ambassador car which I drive myself. I do a bit of writing in my spare time. Three of my stories have been published in magazines and have been well appreciated by my acquaintances. So, who are acquaintances? They are people who are not really close friends, but it's like a hi bye relationship. But I know I cannot make a living by writing alone. So, this is Aniruddha Bose, his description. He enjoys writing, but he realizes that he cannot make ends meet just by writing alone, and that is why he's working in an advertising agency. For the last few months, I haven't been writing at all. Instead, I have read a lot about indigo plantations in Bengal and Bihar in the 19th century. I'm something of an authority on the subject now. So he's got good in depth knowledge on that topic. How the British exploited the poor peasants, how the peasants rose in revolt. So he read about all the exploitation that the British did against the poor peasants in India. And he also read about how those poor peasants then rebelled or protested against it. And how finally, with the invention of a synthetic indigo in Germany, the cultivation of indigo was wiped out from our country. All this I know by heart. It is to describe the terrible experience which instilled in me this interest in indigo that I have taken up my pen today. So, for many months, he did not write, but today he has taken his pen to describe the terrible experience that he had while reading about indigo plantations. At this point, I must tell you something about my past. My father was a well known physician in Mongier, a town in Bihar. This is where I was born, and that is where I did my schooling in a missionary school. I have a brother 5 years older than me. He studied medicine in England and is now attached to a hospital in a suburb of London called Golders Green. He has no plans to return to India. So his brother, who's 5 years older, has taken after his father and become a doctor as well. And he has now settled in London and has no plans to return. My father died when I was 16. Soon after his death, my mother and I left Mongyar and came to Calcutta, where we stayed with my maternal uncle. I went to St. Xavier's College and took my bachelor's degree. Soon after that, I got my job with the advertising agency. My uncle's influence helped, but I wasn't an unworthy candidate myself. I had been a good student, I spoke English fluently, and most of all, I had the ability to carry myself well in an interview. So, though his uncle's influence helped in finding a job, he was also a worthy candidate. My early years in Mongyar had instilled certain habits in me which I had not been able to give up. One of these was an overpowering desire to go far away from the hectic life of Calcutta. So, because he was Born and brought up in Mongyar, after coming to Calcutta, he had a overpowering desire to go away from this hectic life of Calcutta once in a while. And because he owned a car, that is, I had done so several times ever since I bought my car. On weekends, I made trips to Diamond Harbour, Port Canning, and Hassanabad along the Dum Dum Road. Each time I had gone alone because, to be quite honest, I didn't really have a close friend in Calcutta. So that is why he had to go alone, because he did not have any close friends in Calcutta. That is why Pramod's letter made me so happy. Pramod had been my classmate in Mongyar. After I came away to Calcutta, we continued to keep in touch for 3 or 4 years. Then, perhaps it was I who stopped writing. Suddenly, the other day, when I came back from work, I found a letter from Pramod waiting for me on my desk. He had written from Dumka. I have a job in the forest department here. I have my own quarters. Why don't you take a week's leave and come over? So he got a letter from Pramod after a long time stating that he has got a job in the forest department and he asked him to take a week's leave and come there. Some leave was due to me, so I spoke to my boss. And on the 27th of April, now this is an important date. I shall remember the date as long as I live. Now, there is a reason for this. We'll get to know this toward the end of the story. I packed my bags and set off for Dumka. Pramod hadn't suggested that I go by car. It was my idea. Dumka was 200 miles away, and so it would take about 5 or 6 hours at the most. I decided to have a big breakfast, set off by 10, and reach there before dusk. So, because Anirudh liked driving, he decided to go by car, but Pramod suggested him not to travel by car. At least that was the plan. But there was a snag right at the start. So, snag means there was an obstacle. I had my meal and was about to put a pan in my mouth when my father's old friend, Uncle Mohit, suddenly turned up. So, pan is betel leaf. So, there was a sudden guest who turned up. He is a grave old man who I was meeting after 10 years. Okay, so grave old is someone who was very profound. So there was no question of giving him short shrift. So short shrift means pay very little attention. So there was no question of paying him very little attention. I had to offer him tea and listen to him chat for over an hour. I saw Uncle Mohit off and shoved my suitcase and bedding into the back seat of my car. So we remember that the conversation went on for an hour, so he was delayed by an hour. He decided to leave by 10, but now it would have been 11. Just then, my ground floor neighbor, Bhola Babu, walked up with his 4-year-old son, Pintu, in tow. Where are you off to all by yourself? Bhola Babu asked. When I told him, he said with some concern, but that's a long way. Shouldn't you have arranged for a driver? I said I was a very cautious driver myself and that I had taken such care of my car that it was still as good as new. So there's nothing to worry about. Bhola Babu wished me luck and went into the house. I glanced at my wristwatch before turning the ignition key. It was 10 minutes past 11. Although I avoided Howrah and took the Bali Bridge road, it took me an hour and a half to reach Chandarnagar, driving through dingy towns. So, what is the meaning of the word dingy? Dingy is dark and dirty. These first 30 miles were so dreary, that means boring, that the fun of a car journey was quite lost. But from there on, as the car emerged into the open country, the effect was magical. Where in the city did one get to see such a clear blue sky free from chimney smoke and breathe air so pure and so redolent of the smell of earth? So finally, he was away from the city, and after these first 30 miles, he started enjoying his journey once he went into the open country. So redolent means a sweet smelling or fragrant smell. At about 12:30, as I was nearing Burdwan, I began to feel the consequence of having eaten so early. Hungry. I was pulled up by the station, which fell on the way, went into a restaurant, and had a light meal of toast, omelette, and coffee. Then I resumed my journey. I still had 135 miles to go. 20 miles from Burdwan, there was a small town called Panagar. There, I had to leave the Grand Trunk Road and take the road to Ilam Bazar. From Ilam Bazar, the road went via Suri and Masanjor to Dumka. The military camp at Panagar had just come into view when there was a bang from the rear of my car. I had a flat tire. I got down. I had a spare tire and could easily fit it. The thought that other cars would go whizzing by, their occupants laughing at my predicament, was not a pleasant one. Nevertheless, I brought out the jack from the boot and set to work. So now, because he had a flat tire, he said to replace the tires. By the time I finished putting the new tire on, I was dripping with sweat. My watch showed 2:30. Oh, it was already 2:30. It had turned muggy. So, what is the meaning of the word muggy? Warm and humid. And the meaning of the word predicament is a difficult or an unpleasant situation. So, it had turned muggy in the meantime. The cool breeze, which was blowing even an hour ago and was making the bamboo trees sway, had stopped. Now everything was still. As I got back into the car, I noticed a blue black patch in the west above the treetops. Clouds. Was a storm brewing up? A nor'wester? It was useless to speculate. I must drive fast. I helped myself to some hot tea from the flask and resumed my journey. So, all this seems like a very normal story of a person going on a journey, isn't it? So, let's wait for the plot twist. But before I could cross Ilam Bazar, I was caught in the storm. I had enjoyed such nor'westers in the past, sitting in my room, and had even recited Tagore poems to myself to blend with the mood. I had no idea that driving through open country, such a nor'wester could strike terror into the heart. So, at home, he enjoyed it, but while driving through it, it would strike terror into the heart. Claps of thunder always made me uncomfortable. They seemed to show a nasty side of nature, a vicious assault on helpless humanity. It seemed as if the shafts of lightning were all aimed at my poor ambassador, and one of them was sure to find its mark sooner or later. In this precarious state, I passed Suri and was well on my way to Masanjor when there was yet another bang which no one could mistake for a thunderclap. I realized that another of my tires had decided to call it a day. Call it a day means give up. I gave up hope. It was now pouring with rain. My watch said 5:30. For the last 20 miles, I had to keep the speedometer down to 15, or I would have been well past Messenger by now. Where was I? Up ahead, nothing was visible through the rain swept windscreen. The wiper was on, but its effects were more frolicsome than effective. So, what is the meaning of frolicsome? It's like a playful thing or something for merry or something for fun rather than a necessity. It being April, the sun should still be up, but it seemed more like late evening. I opened the door on my right slightly and looked out. What I saw didn't suggest the presence of a town, though I could make out a couple of buildings through the trees. There was no question of getting out of the car and exploring, but one thing was clear enough. There were no shops along the road as far as the eyes could see, and I had no more spare tires. After waiting in the car for a quarter of an hour, it struck me that no other vehicle had passed by in all this time. Was I on the right road? There had been no mistake up to Suri. But suppose I had taken a wrong turning after that. So finally, he started to speculate whether he had taken the wrong road because he noticed that no other vehicles crossed this road and it was quite deserted. It was not impossible in the blinding rain. So he's saying, yes, there is a possibility that it was raining so profusely, it was raining cats and dogs, that there could be a possibility that he had taken a wrong turn. But even if I had made a mistake, it was not as if I had strayed into the jungles of Africa or South America. Wherever I was, there was no doubt that I was still in the district of Birbhum, within 50 miles of Santiniketan, and soon as the rain stopped, my troubles would be over. I might even find a repair shop within a mile or so. So he's saying, not like I have strayed into some deep jungles of Africa or South America. I would still be in the district, and once the rain stops, I would be able to find a repair shop somewhere. I pulled out a packet of wills from my pocket and lit a cigarette. I recalled Bhola Babu's warning. He must have gone through the same trying experience. Or how could he have given me such sound advice? In future, honk, honk, honk. So he was thinking, see, oh, maybe I should have listened to Bola Babu's warning. Maybe he has already gone through this and he was telling me through his experience. I turned round and saw a truck standing behind. Why was it blowing its horn? Was I standing right in the middle of the road? The rain had let up a little. I opened the door, got out, and found that it was no fault of the truck. When my tire burst, the car had swerved at an angle and was now blocking most of the road. There was no room for the truck to pass. Take the car to one side, sir. So the truck driver says that. The sick driver had by now come out of the truck. What's the matter? He asked. A puncture? I shrugged to convey my state of helplessness. If you could lend a hand, I said, we could move the car to one side and let you pass. The sick driver's helper came out too. The three of us pushed the car to one side of the road. Then I found out from the two men that I was indeed on the wrong road from Dhumka. I'd taken a wrong turning and would have to drive back 3 miles to get back on the right track. I also learned that there were no repair shops nearby. The truck went on its way, and as its noise faded away, the truth struck me like a hammer blow. I had reached a dead end. So he realized that he had taken the wrong path. There were no repair shops nearby, and he had exhausted all the spare tires that he had, and he had reached a dead end. There was no way I could reach Dumka that night, and I had no idea how and where I would spend the night. The roadside puddles were alive with the chorus of frogs. The rain had now been reduced to a light drizzle. I got back into the car and was about to light a second cigarette when I spotted a light through the window on my side. I opened the door again. Through the branches of the tree, I saw a rectangle of orange light, a window. Just as smoke meant the presence of fire, a kerosene lamp meant the presence of a human being. There was a house nearby and there were occupants in it. I got out of the car with my torch. The window wasn't too far away. I had to go and investigate. There was a narrow footpath branching off from the main road, which seemed to go in the direction of the house with the window. I locked the car and set off. I made my way, avoiding puddles as far as possible. As I passed a tamarind tree, the house came into view. Well, hardly a house. It was a small cottage with a corrugated tin roof. Through an open door, I could see a hurricane lantern and the leg of a bed. So, what is a hurricane lantern? So, hurricane lantern is a oil burning lamp with a protective glass chimney and a metal cage to keep the flame lit during storms and heavy rain. Is anybody there? I called out. A stocky, middle aged man. So, what is the meaning of stocky? A broad and sturdy built man, middle aged, with a thick mustache, came out of the room and squinted at my torch. I turned the spot away from his face. So, because the light was falling on his eyes, he was squinting, so he removed the torch from his face. Where are you from, sir? The man asked. In a few words, I described my predicament. Is there a place here where I can spend the night? I asked. I shall pay for it, of course. In the dark bungalow, you mean? So, what is the meaning of a dark bungalow? It is a colonial era government rest house during the British time, which is essentially a postal lodge on major routes. But immediately I realized my mistake. I had followed the light of the lantern and had therefore failed to look around. Now I turned the torch to my left, and immediately a large bungalow came into view. You mean that one? I asked. Yes, sir, but there's no bedding, and you can't have meals there. I'm carrying my own bedding, I said. I hope there's a bed there. Yes, sir, a charpoy. And I see there's a stove lit in your room. You must be cooking your own meals? The man broke into a smile and asked if I would care for coarse chapatis prepared by him and urad ka dal cooked by his wife. I said it would do very nicely. I liked all kinds of chapatis and urad was my favorite dal. So finally, he had found a place to stay or spend the night. I don't know what the bungalow must have been like in its heyday. So, heyday means at the peak of existence. But now it was hardly what one understood by a dark bungalow. Constructed during the time of the Raj, the bedroom was large and the ceiling was high. The furniture consisted of a charpoy, a table set against the wall on one side, and a chair with a broken arm. The chowkidar, or the caretaker, had in the meantime lit a lantern for me. He now put it on the table. What's your name? I asked. Sukhandram, sir. Has anybody ever lived in this bungalow, or am I the first one? Oh, no, sir. Others have come too. There was a gentleman who stayed here for 2 nights last winter. I hope there are no ghosts here, I said in a jocular tone. So, jocular means humorous. God forbid, he said. No one has ever complained of ghost. So the first thing that Aniruddha asked was that, are there any ghosts in this abandoned bungalow? So he said, no, nobody's ever complained. I must say I found his words reassuring. If a place is spooky, and old dark bungalows have a reputation for being so, it will be so at all times. When was this bungalow built? I asked. Sukhan began to unroll my bedding and said, This used to be a sahib's bungalow, sir. A sahib? Yes, sir. An indigo planter. There used to be an indigo factory close by. Now only the chimney is standing. I knew indigo was cultivated in these parts at one time. I had seen ruins of indigo factories in Mongyar too in my childhood. It was 10:30 when I went to bed after dinner on Sukhan's coarse chapati and urad kadal. I had sent a telegram to Pramod from Calcutta saying that I would arrive this afternoon. He would naturally wonder what had happened. But it was useless to think of that now because there was no way for him to communicate and let him know. All I could do now was congratulate myself on having found a shelter, and that too without much trouble. In future, I would do as Bhola Babu had advised. I had learnt a lesson, and lessons learnt the hard way are not forgotten easily. Such an important line this is, isn't it? Whenever you learn a lesson in a difficult way, you will never forget it. I put the lantern in the adjoining bathroom. The little light that seeped through the door, which I had kept slightly ajar, was enough. Usually, I find it difficult to sleep with the light on, and yet I did not extinguish the light even though what I badly needed now was sleep. I was worried about my car, which I had left standing on the road. But it was certainly safer to do so in a village than in a city where theft and robbery is so rampant. The sound of drizzle had stopped. The air was now filled with the croaking of frogs and the shrill chirping of crickets. From my bed in that ancient bungalow in this remote village, the city seemed to belong to another planet. Indigo. I thought of the play by Dinabandhu Mitra, Nildarpan, The Mirror of Indigo. As a college student, I had watched a performance of it in the theater on Cornwallis Street. I didn't know how long I had slept when a sound suddenly awakened me. Something was scratching at the door. The door was bolted. Must be a dog or a jackal, I thought. And in a minute or so, the noise stopped. I shut my eyes in an effort to sleep, but the barking of a dog put an end to my efforts. This was not the bark of a stray village dog, but the unmistakable bay of a hound. Hound is the dog that is used for hunting. I was familiar with it. 2 houses away from us in Mongyar lived Mr. Martin. He had a hound which bayed just like this. Who on earth kept a pet hound here? I thought of opening the door to find out as the sound seemed quite near. But then I thought, why bother? It was better to get some more sleep. What time was it now? So he had barely slept, he did not know for how long, and suddenly the scratching on the door awakened him. A faint moonlight came in through the window. I raised my left hand to glance at the wristwatch and gave a start. My wristwatch was gone. And yet, because it was an automatic watch, I always wore it to bed. Where did it disappear and how? Were there thieves around? What would happen to my car then? So he started getting anxious now. Did someone steal my automatic watch? What about my car? Is that also going to be stolen? I felt beside my pillow for my torch and found it gone too. I jumped out of bed, knelt on the floor, and looked underneath it. My suitcase too had disappeared. My head started spinning. Something had to be done about it. I called out, Chaukidar! There was no answer. I went to the door and found that it was still bolted. The window had bars. So, how did the thief enter? As I was about to unfasten the bolt, I glanced at my hand and experienced an odd feeling. Had whitewash from the wall gone onto my hand, or was it white powder? Why did it look so pale? I had gone to bed wearing a vest. Why then was I now wearing a long sleeved silk shirt? I felt a throbbing in my head. I opened the door and went out into the veranda. Chaukidar! The word that came out was spoken with the unmistakable accent of an Englishman. And where was the Chaukidar and where was his little cottage? There was now a wide open field in front of the bungalow. In the distance was a building with a high chimney. The surrounding was unusually quiet. They had changed, and so had I. So now he was no longer Aniruddha, but he was that Englishman who used to reside in this bungalow. I came back into the bedroom in a sweat. My eyes had got used to the darkness. I could now clearly make out the details. The bed was there, but it was covered with a mosquito net. I hadn't been using one. The pillow too was unlike the one that I had bought with me. This one had a border with frills, mine didn't. The table and the chair stood where they did, but they had lost their aged look. The varnished wood shone even in the soft light. On the table stood not a lantern but a kerosene lamp with an ornate shade. So now he is recognizing all the changes that have happened. So he's like, this wasn't like this. I did not use a mosquito net. There were other objects in the room which gradually came into view. A pair of steel trunks in a corner, a folding bracket on the wall from which hung a coat, an unfamiliar type of headgear, and a hunting crop. Below the bracket, Standing against the wall was a pair of galoshes. So, galoshes are waterproof overshoes that is usually made of rubber. I turned away from the objects and took another look at myself. Till now, I had only noticed the silk shirt. Now I saw the narrow trousers and the socks. I didn't have shoes on, but saw a pair of black boots on the floor by the bed. I passed my right hand over my face and realized that not only my complexion, but my features too had changed. I didn't possess such a sharp nose, nor such thin lips or narrow chin. I felt the hair on my head and found that it was wavy and that there were sideburns which reached below my ears. So here shape shifting has happened. So what is shape shifting? The ability to physically transform from one identity or appearance to something else. In spite of my surprise and terror, I suddenly felt a great urge to find out what I look like. But where to find a mirror? I strode towards the bathroom, opened the door with a sharp push, and went in. There had been nothing there but a bucket. Now I saw a metal bathtub and a mug kept on a stool beside it. The thing I was looking for was right in front of me, an oval mirror fixed to a dressing table. I looked into it, but the person reflecting in it was not me, but some devilish trick I had turned into the 19th century Englishman with a sallow complexion. So, sallow means an unhealthy yellow complexion, blonde hair, light eyes, from which shone a strange mixture of hardness and suffering. So now Aniruddha has realized that he has transformed into the long dead planter who used to live there. How old would the Englishman be? Not more than 30, but it looked as if either illness or hard work or both had aged him prematurely. So even if he was hardly 30, he looked quite worn out. So it showed that either he had gone through suffering, some illness, or he had worked really hard. I went closer and had a good look at my face. So here my is put in single quotes because though his mind was his body was of someone else. As I looked, a deep sigh rose from the depth of my heart. The voice was not mine. The sigh too expressed not my feelings but those of the Englishman. What followed made it clear that all my limbs were acting of their own violation. And yet it was surprising that I, Aniruddha Bose, was perfectly aware of the change in identity. But I didn't know if the change was permanent or if there was any way to regain my lost control. So here he was in control of his mind but not his body. I came back to the bedroom. Now I glanced at the table. Below the lamp was a notebook bound in leather. It was open at a blank page. Beside it was an inkwell with a quill pen dipped in it. I walked over to the table. Some unseen force made me sit in the chair and pick up the pen with my right hand. The hand now moved towards the left hand page of the notebook, and the silent room was filled with the noise of a quill scratching the blank page. This is what I wrote: 27th April 1868. Those fiendish mosquitoes are singing in my ears again. So here, fiendish means extremely wicked or unpleasant. So that's how the son of a mighty empire has to meet his end at the hands of a tiny insect. What strange will of God is this? Eric has made his escape. Percy and Tony too left earlier. Okay, so he's saying that his friends have escaped and they have left. Perhaps I was greedier than them. So he was saying that he was greedy and that is why he had not left. So, in spite of repeated attacks of malaria, I couldn't resist the lure of indigo. So, he was greedy for money and that attracted him, and that is why he could not leave where others left and saved their lives. No, not only that, one mustn't lie in one's diary. My countrymen know me only too well. I didn't lead a blameless life at home either. And they surely have not forgotten that. So he did not lead a blameless life at home either. So he was not a good person. So I did not dare to go back home. I know I will have to stay here and lay down my life on this alien soil. My place will be beside the graves of my wife Mary and my dear little son Toby. I have treated the natives here so badly that there is no one to shed a tear at my passing away. So he's saying that he has treated the natives so badly that there is no one who's going to shed a tear when he passes away. And his wife and his child, they have passed away because of malaria. So if you see here, in some way it is karma that his friends have been able to escape from malaria and other problems, but he was stuck here. He had to pay for his karma by staying back here, bear the pain that his wife and his little son has passed away, and also that he has to die in a foreign soil where no one is going to shed a tear for him. Perhaps Mirjan would miss me, my faithful, trusted bearer Mirjan. And Rex? My real worry is about Rex. Alas, faithful Rex. When I die, these people will not spare you. They will either stone you or club you to death. If only I could do something about you. So now he's thinking about his faithful dog because as soon as the Englishman passes away, then they will also stone and kill the dog. I could write no more. The hands were shaking, not mine, the diarist's. I put down the pen. Then my right hand dropped and moved to the right and made for the handle of the drawer. I opened it. Inside there was a pin cushion, a brass paperweight, a pipe, and some papers. The drawer opened a little more. A metal object glinted in the half light. It was a pistol, its butt inlaid with ivory. So its handle had ivory in it. The hand pulled out the pistol. It had stopped shaking. A group of jackals cried out. It was as if in answer to the jackal's cry that the hound bayed again. I left the chair and advanced towards the door. I went out into the veranda. The field in front was bathed in moonlight. About 10 yards from the veranda stood a large greyhound. He wagged his tail as he saw me. So that was his dog Rex. Rex, it was the same deep English voice. The echo of the call came floating back from the faraway factory and bamboo grove. Rex, Rex. Rex came up towards the veranda. As he stepped from the grass onto the cement, my right hand rose to my waist, the pistol pointing towards the hound. Rex stopped in his tracks, his eyes on the pistol. He gave a low growl. My right forefinger pressed the trigger. As the gun throbbed with a blinding flash, smoke and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Rex, lifeless, blood splattered body lay partly on the veranda and partly on the grass. The sound of the pistol had wakened the crows in the nearby trees. A hubbub now rose from the direction of the factory. So, hubbub means a confused mix of commotion. I came back into the bedroom, bolted the door, and sat on the bed. The shouting drew near. I placed the still hot muzzle of the pistol by my right ear. That's all I remember. So he killed himself as well. I woke up at the sound of knocking. I brought you tea, sir. Daylight flooded in through the window. Out of sheer habit, my eyes strayed to my left wrist. 13 minutes past 6. I brought the watch closer to my eyes to read the date. April the 28th. So it was actually the 100th anniversary of the death of the Englishman. I now opened the door and let Sukandram in. There's a car repair shop half an hour down the road, sir, he said. It'll open at 7. Very good, I said, and proceeded to drink my tea. Would anyone believe me when they hear of my experience on the night of the 100th anniversary of the death of an English indigo planter in Bourbon? So, what a paranormal and a haunting experience he had to experience what the Englishman felt. He felt that greed, he felt shame, he felt that he felt helpless. So now let's go into the themes and discuss the various themes in the story. The first is impact of past in the present. The story portrays that history is not a past incident, but it still has an impact on present, and the traumatic events or profound feelings from the past can leave an imprint that transcends time, affecting the current generation. So, past definitely has a profound impact on the present. The next is colonial exploitation. The story includes how the British exploited the poor peasants of India. The Englishman confesses to the participation in this oppressive system of greed and mistreatment. He confesses about the cruelty he inflicted towards the native people. This aspect emphasizes the harsh realities of colonial rule, the suffering it inflicted not only on the poor people, but in a way also the oppressors, as they carry the heavy debt of guilt in their mind. So, if you remember, finally we get to know about the perspective from the Englishman's view of how he also had a heavy debt of guilt in his mind for mistreating the poor people. The next is karma or justice. Though the Englishman did injustice to the poor peasants and received no punishment from the judicial system, but justice is rarely straightforward, isn't it? Sometimes it comes from within in the form of guilt and from forces beyond human comprehension. That is, he could not return to his own homeland and die there. And he was away from his family. He was alone. There was no one to cry for him. So, in a way, justice prevailed. The next is loss of control. When Aniruddha experienced a paranormal activity where the Englishman's spirit entered his body, he knew who he was and could remember every detail to recall it. He was in a conscious state of mind, but he did not have control of his own body and could not control his actions. This portrays emotions of helplessness. The next is unsettled past. Even after 100 years of the Englishman's passing, the story portrayed the plight, the anxiety, the guilt of the Englishman. The soul was unrested and things were unsettled in the past. The Englishman left lonely because his friends had escaped, his family had died, but he could not go because of his greed and could not resist the lure of indigo. He realized that he had treated the natives badly and no one would shed a tear for him. Also, shooting his beloved dog became a reason for his unrested soul because he had committed a murder. All these feelings of regret, anxiety, loneliness, greed, and guilt may have caused an element of unrest in his spirit. So, wasn't the story beautifully written by Satyajit Ray? So, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please share it among your friends. And if you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Do it right now. Thank you. God bless.